Imagine a world where the man who embodied courage never returned, where the symbol that held nations together remained frozen in time, while everything else slowly fell apart. In this alternate timeline, Captain America never wakes up after the crash, no shield raised against new threats, no leader to unite the broken, and as the world moves on without him, darkness spreads, quiet at first, then inevitable. This is the story of a universe deprived of its heart, and what rises to fill the void. The Helicarrier lights flickered against the icy ocean as search teams swept through the wreckage field. But unlike the world we know, where hope flickered with every sonar ping, this time all they found was silence. Steve Rogers' body was never recovered. The world was told he died a hero lost beneath the Atlantic, sacrificing himself to save millions. His legend was sealed not by survival, but by disappearance. And in the shadow of that loss, the world changed. Howard Stark spent years obsessively searching, never finding even a whisper of the man he'd sworn to bring home. The SSR continued fighting remnants of Hydra, but without Captain America's living presence, morale sank like a stone. Hydra sensed the void instantly. Their operations became bolder. Strikes that Steve's very existence would have deterred now surged across Europe and Asia, testing the SSR's thinning limits. By 1950, the Cold War hardened faster, sharper. Nations distrusted each other more deeply, without the memory of a symbol who had fought beside soldiers of every background. Captain America had been more than a soldier. He had been a myth that transcended borders. Without him, the world accepted division as normal. In the 1980s, when the world teetered between nuclear terror and technological evolution, the absence of Steve Rogers planted a seed inside the hearts of leaders on both sides. Fear. The kind that breeds paranoia. Super soldier programs, once abandoned or hidden, were resurrected in secret labs across the globe. America tried again and again to recreate the serum, producing unstable, dangerous results that were buried before the public ever saw them. Other nations did the same. The race for supremacy intensified, fueled by whispers of a perfect soldier who once existed, yet left no successor. By the time Tony Stark was born, the world was already shifting toward something darker. Howard, haunted by memories of Captain Rogers, raised Tony in a world shaped by failure and regret. S.H.I.E.L.D. never formed the way it was meant to. Its early foundations cracked, without Steve's influence on the people who would eventually lead it. Nick Fury still climbed through the ranks, but he grew up in an organization more militaristic, less hopeful, more suspicious. Without Steve, Fury's worldview hardened. He believed humanity needed not inspiration, but control. And Hydra, embedded deep within the SSR's veins, continued spreading unseen. Without Captain America's long shadow looming over them, they evolved, patient and confident. The world believed the age of heroes would never come. Only wars, only weapons, only fear. And then, decades later, the universe trembled again. The Tesseract resurfaced, but this time, the man destined to stand against the storm wasn't there. The chain of events that would birth the Avengers began to unravel before it even started. Without Captain America, the pieces that once formed Earth's greatest team shifted, some never finding their place at all, and as the threat of gods and monsters crept nearer, Earth prepared for war with no shield to raise in its defense. The year Loki arrived on Earth, the world was already fractured, politically, morally, spiritually. Nick Fury, hardened by decades of mistrust, recognized instantly that humanity had no symbol capable of rallying them. Without Captain America's legacy, there was no memory of a leader who could stand above ideology and ego. Fury still sought out Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Natasha Romanoff. But something intangible was missing, something that Steve's presence would have silently woven between them. Unity. Tony Stark entered the project not with reluctant curiosity, but with cynicism. He had grown up hearing stories of the lost super soldier, but without a living example. He dismissed Captain America as a relic and emblem of a naive era, not a blueprint for heroism. His father's obsession with Steve had created distance between them, leaving Tony resentful of a ghost he believed he could never measure up to. Bruce Banner, terrified of what he had become, felt even more out of place than in the original timeline. Without the idea of a selfless hero who once volunteered to be transformed, Bruce perceived himself not as a tragic mirror, but as a monster with no comparison. No one had ever stepped into a machine with hope and come out stronger. Only he had stepped in and emerged cursed. His isolation deepened, making the Hulk harder to control. Thor's arrival exposed Earth's vulnerabilities even further. The battles that shook the desert broadcast a harsh truth. Humans were playing in realms far beyond their reach. In the original timeline, Captain America's mere presence reassured humanity that a mortal could stand among gods. Without him, the world felt small, powerless, almost primitive, in the face of Asgard's might. Fury knew the Avengers could not function as a team. They bickered, clashed, distrusted. Tony challenged everyone. Thor dismissed them. Banner withdrew. Natasha carried a heavy silence. Then came Clint Barton, freed from Loki's control earlier this time, thanks to a more paranoid and aggressive approach by S.H.I.E.L.D. But even he sensed the instability. The initiative was wrong, built on fear, not belief. And Loki saw it instantly. He saw a planet without a champion, a world where Hydra still lingered in the shadows, a species fractured enough that the slightest push could make them kneel. When the battle for the Tesseract began, Loki hit them where it hurt most. He mocked their lack of unity. He taunted Fury for trying to build a team around broken men and conflicted gods. Without Steve Rogers, there was no moral center to push back against the chaos Loki unleashed. The helicarrier incident spiraled far more violently. When Bruce transformed, there was no steadying presence like Steve to ground the others. Hulk tore through the corridors with pure fury, nearly destroying the entire vessel. Thor barely contained him, and the fight between them left the helicarrier crippled, not just damaged, but falling apart in the sky. In the aftermath, Tony stood staring at the wreckage, an unspoken truth tightening in his chest. This world had never learned how to stand together. It only knew how to fight alone. The Avengers never became a team that day. They became 5 powerful individuals forced into battle side by side. When Loki opened the portal above New York, the consequences of that failure began to unfold. The sky split open above Manhattan, spilling an alien army into a world unprepared for unity. The Chitauri descended like a plague, swarming the streets with ruthless precision. Sirens wailed, civilians ran in every direction, and the Avengers, if they could even be called that, scrambled without coordination. Thor struck first, a whirlwind of lightning tearing through the initial wave. But without Steve's calm, strategic mind, Thor fought like a lone god defending a doomed world. Natasha and Clint moved with lethal efficiency, but they lacked direction. No coordinated strikes, no formation, no rallying point. Bruce, still shaken from the helicarrier rampage, barely managed to transform without losing himself entirely. Even then, Hulk's path was chaotic and unpredictable. And Tony was trying to be everywhere at once, flying through collapsing skyscrapers, pulling civilians out of the rubble, intercepting leviathans. But for every problem he solved, 3 more appeared. As he soared through the smoke-filled air, he realized something horrifying. They were losing, not because they weren't powerful enough, but because they weren't together. In the universe Steve Rogers originally lived in, one voice had cut through the chaos and shaped the battlefield. One man had pointed, directed, unified. Here, there was only noise. A leviathan crashed through a building, sending a tidal wave of debris down the street. Tony dodged at the last second, but a bus full of trapped civilians lay directly in its path. Thor dove toward it, lightning crackling off his hammer, but the distance was too great. Natasha and Clint saw what was coming, but were too far to intervene. Bruce roared, racing toward the disaster, but the Hulk couldn't reach it in time. The explosion echoed like a scream. The bus was gone. Something broke in Tony in that moment, fractured deeper than any wound. He hovered in the smoke, staring at the fire below as the weight of a world without a leader finally settled on his shoulders. This was the future his father feared. This was the world that had never understood what it meant to be more than soldiers, more than weapons, more than frightened individuals trying to survive. It was a world without Captain America, and Loki reveled in it. From the top of Stark Tower, he watched humanity collapse beneath his invasion. He knew this Earth was different, more fragile, less inspired. His smile widened as he whispered to the storm, "They have no champion, but even gods make mistakes." 4 in the ruins of New York, 5 exhausted, injured, uncoordinated warriors began to understand something Steve Rogers had lived his entire life without ever needing to say. Strength means nothing without purpose. Power means nothing without unity. Tony landed beside Thor, bruised and shaken. Natasha and Clint regrouped, bloodied but focused. Bruce steadied himself, breathing deeply, as Hulk growled like a caged storm. They looked at each other, not as a team, not as friends, but as people with no other choice but to rise. "For now," Tony said, "we fight. Together." It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a strategy. But it was the spark the world had been missing. They took to the battlefield, again, not flawlessly, not seamlessly, but with intention. Thor covered ground strikes, while Tony intercepted air assaults. Natasha coordinated ground evacuations, guiding Hulk's raw strength. Clint provided pinpoint support from impossible angles. For the first time, the Avengers resembled something more than chaos, but the cost of learning unity this late would be steep. The battle raged into the late afternoon, smoke blotting out the sun as the Avengers pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. They fought with desperation, not confidence every strike, carrying the weight of thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Slowly, painfully, they carved a path through the alien armada. But they all felt it. They were still a team born too late. Loki watched from the shattered glass throne he'd made of Stark Tower, his confidence beginning to waver. He had underestimated humanity's stubbornness, even without its champion. But he still held one undeniable advantage. The longer the portal remained open, the more Chitauri poured through. Their numbers were limitless. The Avengers were not. On the streets below, Tony inspected the portal device, calculating the energy around it. His HUD flickered with warnings. The numbers didn't make sense. Using the Tesseract, the portal could theoretically stay open indefinitely. They would be overrun long before they could close it the traditional way. He knew what had to be done. He knew what Steve would have done. Without saying a word, Tony soared upward, higher and higher, dodging alien blasts. Thor looked up. Natasha looked up. Even Hulk paused, squinting at the streak of red and gold vanishing into the sky. Tony carried a nuclear missile launched by a desperate military one that had decided New York was an acceptable sacrifice. Tony didn't blame them. In a world without Captain America, faith had become a luxury. As he guided the missile toward the portal, memories flashed his father's voice. The stories he grew up resenting, the ghost of the man who had once crashed into the ice for the sake of millions. A man Tony had never met. A man he'd never believed in. And yet, here he was, following the same path. The missile pierced the portal. The stars swallowed him. Silence. The detonation tore through the Chitauri command ship, freezing the army mid-stride. Across New York, the invaders collapsed lifelessly. Their leviathans fell like mountains, their foot soldiers like broken machinery. The portal began to shrink. Tony plummeted back through, unconscious, suit failing, oxygen gone. He fell like a dying comet. Thor was the first to reach him. Hulk caught Tony just before he struck the ground, breaking the fall with a thunderous skid across broken pavement. For a terrifying moment, Tony didn't move. Then he gasped. The tension broke. Natasha exhaled. Clint laughed shakily. Thor smiled, relief washing over him like sunlight through storm clouds. Even Hulk grinned, nudging Tony's armor. They had one, but not the way they were meant to. Not with unity shaped by leadership, but with unity forged by tragedy. In the days that followed, New York slowly began to rebuild. The Avengers stood before the world, not flawless, not fully formed, but undeniable. They had saved millions. Yet everyone sensed that something fundamental was missing. There was no symbol to rally behind. No legend reaching across generations, reminding humanity who they could be. Nick Fury watched the news from a quiet SHIELD corridor. "They did it," Maria Hill said. "Yes," Fury replied. "But imagine what they could have been if he'd lived." Weeks later, Fury visited a cold memorial at the edge of the Atlantic, a simple plaque honoring the man the world lost decades ago. He stood there a long time. "Maybe it wasn't the world that needed him," Fury whispered. "Maybe it was us." Far beneath the ice, frozen and silent, a lonely figure remained entombed and aware of the chaos, the battles, the near destruction of Earth, unaware that his absence had reshaped the entire world. Captain America never woke up, and the world had survived. But at a price it would feel for generations. In this alternate reality, the Avengers rose not because a leader united them, but because the world forced them to stand together. Their victory came with scars emotional, moral, and historical. They learned, painfully, that strength without guidance is chaos, and unity without inspiration is fragile. A world without Captain America found its heroes, but not its hope. Not fully. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, the man who could have changed everything remained frozen, a reminder that one person can alter not just the outcome of a war, the soul of an entire world.